right, on to question 2. So Jordan asks, this is a nice short one. How do I know, although I'm sure your answer will be lengthy, how do I know whether or not my strategic thinking is effective when everything is moving so quickly? And I can kind of see Jordan's point here around how he's kind of like linking, decision making to strategic thinking, which is so important when you're trying to move fast.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's like, I'm almost like kudos to you for even like stepping back and asking, am I thinking strategically right now? Because I think when there's so much urgency right now, it's very easy to just get stuck in a reactive mode. So, I think first of all is really like, how are you defining strategic thinking? So whether, before you evaluate, right, is my strategic thinking effective? Let's like baseline definition. What is strategic thinking? And sometimes you'll make a strategic bet, which won't pay off. And sometimes it'll be incredibly high impact. But at the end of the day, strategic thinking isn't about always being right. It's about lifting your head up out of your day to day and taking your whole environment into account. And I can't emphasize this enough. I think this comes into play more than ever right now because everyone feels like they're behind. It is a race right now. And when you feel like you're behind, you really tend to operate from a reactive position. And you can lose sight of being strategic very easily. Mm-hmm. And so here's a good way to check, to ask yourself, like, am I being strategic right now? So here's a way to think, like, am I doing these things? And these things are, so behavior number 1 is really understanding your company's strategy and goals. And how does that change now with AI, right? So that's behavior number 1. Behavior number 2 then is educating yourself on the industry and the market your company is in. And I think, again, right now, you've got to look at a lens and say, well, how is my industry impacted by AI? What's going to change? What's not going to change? Does it have a moat or not? And then behavior number 3 is really carving out enough time. And I think this is where, when you already feel like you're behind, it's very hard to do this, but it's very important, is carving out enough time to actually think big picture and to step out. And so, because if we don't do this and we just stay in a reactive mode, we can end up just sort of operating these ruts and they don't take in the new context. And so, for example, let's say you're hiring, your team might be expanding, your hiring strategy might need to look really different right now because of AI, right? How are you even if you're hiring a similar role, then how are you evaluating their AI fluency right now, right? So just again, you got to make time to actually step back and think about the big picture. And behavior number 4 is set strategic priorities and align your team around them. So when things are moving so quickly, it is that much more important that you communicate what your strategic priorities are, because people need the context in which to make their own decisions quickly. And as we've seen and will continue to see, as orgs are flattening and more people are having more direct reports, right? Many people don't have that time to kind of check in with each person. And so it's just so important to communicate what your strategic priorities are. They might change, right? But communicate, make sure people understand why they are the way they are right now so that they have that context to make decisions in and can make decisions quickly. I think lastly, once you've gone through these behaviors, right, I think it's very beneficial right now because there's so much change. Is just check your thinking. So asking your manager, right, here's what I'm noticing right now. Like, here's how I'm thinking strategically about the business, but what am I missing? And this has 2 effects, right? One, of course, is like alignment, right? Like, are you thinking? Because the last thing you want to do is communicate your strategic priorities if they aren't aligned, right, with the company at large. And then further, you're also making your strategic thinking visible. The fact that like you are creating the time and space to be able to make sure that you're thinking strategically and then communicating that, right, up and down. So I think those are the key things. Is like, 1, hats off to you for even reminding yourself to think strategically. I think you really have to be intentional about that right now, especially when everyone feels like they're behind. And those are the 4 behaviors that we just went through. And then alignment, like it's always helpful to just check in and see sort of if you're strategic, the way you're thinking strategically maps to the way your manager or maybe some of your cross-functional leaders are thinking as well.